So, as promised in the last episode, where I touched on what I think or what I thought the next steps were for Black people, or as we sometimes say, Black America, I'm going to touch on what I believe is largely in order for white America. Now, I originally thought I would address white people and other people of color as well, but the more I thought about it, I feel I need to put less emphasis on that element and then just bring the discussion back to Black and white relations. So right now we're like in late November. It's been over 2 weeks since the November 3rd election. And as of today, November 20th, Donald Trump, or the Trump administration, and their enablers continue disputing the results of the Joe Biden and Kamala Harris victory with these silly ass lawsuits where they have no supporting evidence of any wrongdoing with the voting. They continue to undermine the transition to the Biden administration, and it really seems like they're doing everything they can to cripple the country with firing officials in key positions. They're making as big of a mess as they can while claiming it's to the end of defending quote unquote patriots, like the real Americans is what they call, which to me it sounds like coded language, really meaning white people. They're fucking crazy. And I really waste no energy on appealing to the intellect and the humanity of those people. So instead, I direct my energy towards those who are more open-minded and reasonable. So I've had some of my, in the past, some of my white friends and some of my work colleagues express sympathy towards Black people based on police brutality and other forms of racial aggression. One of the questions that sometimes posed was, it's like, well, what can I do? Or how can I help? So I'd give them the unfiltered version of how Black people really think and feel about a lot of these things that are happening during our times. And sometimes, frankly, they weren't ready for the kind of honesty that I was giving them. My thought is, well, if they genuinely want to know what to do, chances are lots of white people and even other people of color may want to know also. So here it is, my prescription on what I think you, white Americans, should do as we move into the Biden and Harris presidency. So in my personal and professional life, I've heard white people ranging from film executives, coaches, and those that love our art say things like, oh, I know Black people. And the truth really is, like, you really don't know. What you know are some things about us. What you know doesn't capture the full spectrum of our emotions and our worldview as Black people. It's something you experience from birth, and there's no way around it unless you're Black and you're born Black. And I don't care if your best friend or your spouse or your adopted child is Black. You are incapable of knowing, so let us tell you how things are. And if you can accept that you and others really don't know us, then you can surely accept that this society couldn't reasonably serve our needs without our help. So starting with the religious community, you got to remember who you are supposed to be, white people. If you claim to be men, women, and children of God, the principles you are supposed to stand on are firmly planted on a foundation of equality and brotherhood and service to humanity. Peace and godliness. So you know who your parishioners are, and you know who your religious leaders are. You can't wear crosses as jewelry and sit in a church with pictures of Christ everywhere and read scripture promoting love and peace while unarmed Black people are executed by police and harassed during peaceful protests and other situations. Based on your religion's moral standards, You shouldn't support politicians like a Lindsey Graham or a Donald Trump when they say things like, Black people will be okay as long as they vote Republican. Or when Donald Trump say things like, or he calls our athletes son of a bitches while we're advocating for racial equality. Like, what's godly or brotherly about that? So when you know your parishioners and you know your community members go marching out of the streets and they're screaming racist rhetoric directed at Black people, and your politicians are drafting policies that negatively impact and target Black people, the message of peace, unity, and anti-racism needs to make its way into your sermons, even in your Sunday school teachings, right? You need to tell your parishioners and your spiritual leaders loud and clear, that type of behavior and that attitude has no place in your house of worship. That's if you're being a true pious or religious person. Maybe reach out to some of these Black people or some of these Black churches and plan events together, fellowship, speak to their religious leaders. It's the brotherly thing to do, right? I mean, you can't claim that you're about it when your actions don't follow that. And after George Floyd's death, I remember a bunch of corporations expressing their support for BLM via social media, their social media postings, email blasts, and some displaying the BLM logo on some of their company websites. And that act by itself is good, but quite frankly, it comes off as reactionary and at times very hollow. So my message to white-owned corporations, and there are a lot of them, and their senior management claiming to do more, here's what I suggest you should do. Hire an appropriate number of Black people as employees or contractors to address diversity and inclusion and appropriately meet the needs of your Black employees. You can hire qualified people, and not just anybody to fill a seat and to function as some sort of a PR piece or some ornament that gives the appearance of you serving your Black employees. The needs of minorities tend to get lost in big and even medium-sized businesses. Like I've been at them both. It does happen. Racism, whether it's direct or indirect, still poses a risk at the well-being of Black employees, believe it or not. And if you argue that it doesn't make sense to hire just for Black employees, well, there's workarounds to that. And the workaround is that you can dedicate staff or contractors to serve all your minorities' needs, including your Black employees. What should also be lumped into that is contributing to your Black consumers relative to how much your Black consumers patronize your businesses. And if you don't already know what the ethnic mix of your customers are, then you should find out. And then you should show them gratitude through things, like scholarships, internships, entry-level jobs, or sponsorships. Then you can go public with that. Maybe it's something that'll increase more consumer loyalty and profits that you can brag about openly. And who's gonna blame you for that? So moving along to healthcare professionals. Like right now, everybody knows that job is a bitch. And I can't imagine having the stress of preserving lives, let alone during a pandemic. All the data supports that poverty and inequality adversely affects African Americans. I don't have any data to support a strong suspicion that, many or I guess blue collar Black patients aren't as educated as they need to be as far as race specific and needed screenings for illnesses affecting Black people. But my plea is to spend an extra couple of minutes if you need to with these patients. One, in getting to know their lifestyle and their diet, and another for encouraging them to be screened for age specific and gender specific and race specific illnesses. Some of you have been great to me personally as a patient, but others, quite honestly, are lacking for different reasons. And I can't tell you how many times wrong assumptions have been made about me and my lifestyle because I was Black. And to me, the thing to do is to ask, like, hey, what's your diet like? Or what kind of meals are you eating? And what kind of exercise are you getting into? And just a whole litany of tests or questions. But we need you to be more empathetic and on the nose, because there's a segment of Black people who are very skeptical of the medical industry for a whole host of reasons. You can imagine with the racism that runs rampant in this country and inequality. So moving along to law enforcement, look, every race can point to a small segment of their own people and say, these motherfuckers are rotten. So let's acknowledge that we as Black people have them, Latinos have them, Asians have them, and yes, white people, you have them too. We know that some people can't be reasoned with. And we know that unfortunately, some people only understand the language of force or the language of violence. There are nuanced reasons why some people or all people find themselves with more run-ins with the law than others. Everybody has a story. The issue a lot of us have is with the use of lethal force on Black people when their white counterparts happen to live after comparable confrontations or incidents with the police. Many of us have seen video of white cops gingerly de-escalating a white man who was swinging a hatchet at them. He was taken into custody and that guy lived. Conversely, Walter Wallace, a Philadelphia man, a Black man who was wielding a knife at two cops, was shot and killed. But there's too many of these examples with contrasting scenarios and contrasting results, which points to flaws in the way white law enforcement officials police Black civilians. And I personally think the whole notion of defunding the police is silly, but if you're reasonable and you're white and you're in law enforcement, you know there's a problem in your house and you know that you need to be courageous in discouraging some of the ills of law enforcement. Change starts at the top. And if you're serious about it, if you're serious about making an impact, you need to ensure that law enforcement agencies revamp the training. My guess is that some of the candidates that go into law enforcement need more thorough training in matters of interacting with people of color, and in this case, interacting with Black people, as well as training on how to de-escalate without the use of force and needlessly resort to excessive violence in policing. For those candidates and or officers who are inept at doing that, they need to be weeded out. So if you're serious about making an impact, there needs to be tangible consequences for these officers caught on camera being excessively violent or caught on radio making blatant comments when they're outright using racial slurs against Black people and they're using language threatening to kill Black people in masses, as in the case of, I think it was one cop in North Carolina more than a month ago. Cops need to police each other in this regard by changing the culture. You can support your fellow officers and chastise them for racist actions at the same time. You don't have to do one or the other. It's a problem when you have officers whom may have not had any substantial interaction with Black people, and then suddenly they're put in a position where they're now policing them with deadly weapons. It's a bad mix. They need to be taught, and I suggest that this happens with Black people who can help close that knowledge gap. Now, they can take the position of, well, we're the police and what we say goes, but it isn't a good policy. And it's better that you learn how to police more efficiently and build a rapport with the people that you police with less stress, less civil lawsuits, less death, less injury, and a less incident of career-ending decisions for the police officers themselves. And finally, for white citizens, here's my message to you. If you're serious about changing the social discourse between blacks and whites, then you need to challenge your people, challenge your white friends, challenge your colleagues, your lovers, your family members. When these people, especially your politicians who make racist comments and threats or shift their whole being towards the oppression and destruction of black people, you need to speak up. You need to tell them, like, hey, I don't support politicians that behave like that or think in that manner. Or look, there's no way I'm raising a family with a racist spouse. And if it's your parents, you need to tell them, look, listen, your racist rants put me in a place where I can't be around you. I don't want to hear that. And especially during some of these public confrontations where you see video with white people harassing black people who are doing their job or just shopping. And one of those people was my niece, who happens to deliver for a company I won't name, but she made a delivery to a house with a noose hanging in the garage, and it made her really uncomfortable. Nobody should go through that. So stand up for what's right. And if you have anecdotes, share them. Share these anecdotes where you've had interaction with black people and say, hey, I hear what you're saying, but that's not my experience. I've done business with black people, or I've broken bread with black people, played ball, sports. I happen to work with black people, and none of that, what you say, makes any sense to me. Black people aren't looking for worship. What we're looking for and what we expect is this country to live up to the ideals it's been advertising for generations, despite the way we've been treated. We are much more than fashion statements and our prowess in sports and entertainment and the arts. Acknowledging those attributes without acknowledging our value as human beings, our intellectual prowess, and our humanity is really like cutting the proverbial baby in half. So if you care, if you want to know what to do, challenge yourself and others to do the right thing when it comes to race. I could go on and on about this. And a lot of this may sound repetitive, but the reason why we repeat a lot of what we say is because it's still relevant. And there's still issues that keep going and going and going. So that's what I got for you. Take it with love. We all just want harmony. We all just want peace. Tease the next episode. I'm going to talk about the passing of Chadwick Boseman from Black Panther. You might know, and I'll tell you how his death and why his death really hit home with me. And I'll share a personal story with you. So if you like the content, please subscribe, share, follow on social media, Misconnected Podcast on Twitter and on Instagram. If you want to reach out with questions or comments, if the email is info@themisconnected.com. That's what I got. Be safe, take care of yourself, and be well.